In a quiet little town, there was a small dojo tucked away on the edge of the city. It wasn't flashy or fancy, just a simple place with worn-out mats and faded posters of martial arts legends on the walls. But for the people who trained there, it was more than just a gym, it was a second home. This is where our story begins. One evening, a woman walked into the dojo for her very first Jiu Jitsu class. She wasn't particularly tall, muscular, or athletic. In fact, she looked like someone you'd pass on the street without giving a second thought. Her name wasn't important, but what mattered was that she had decided to step out of her comfort zone for the first time in years. At 35, she felt like life had passed her by. She'd spent most of her days working at a desk job, avoiding anything physical because she didn't think she was cut out for it. But something inside her finally clicked. Maybe it was watching videos of people talking about self-defense, or maybe it was just the voice in her head telling her to stop being afraid. Whatever it was, she decided to give jiu-jitsu a shot. When she pushed open the heavy door of the dojo, the smell of sweat and rubber mats hit her immediately. The room buzzed with energy as people rolled around on the mats, grappling and practicing moves that looked both graceful and brutal at the same time. Some of them moved like dancers, while others grunted and struggled against each other. It was chaotic, yet strangely mesmerizing. For a moment, she stood frozen near the entrance, clutching her oversized GI, the traditional uniform for jiu-jitsu, that she'd borrowed from a friend. She felt out of place, like a fish trying to swim in deep water. Her arrival didn't go unnoticed. A few heads turned toward her, sizing her up. One guy in particular smirked when he saw her standing awkwardly by the door. He was one of those confident types, tall, broad-shouldered, and wearing his black belt proudly around his waist. You could tell he was used to being the center of attention. Without missing a beat, he called out loud enough for everyone to hear, "Hey, you sure this is the right place?" His tone was mocking, dripping with sarcasm. The comment drew a few chuckles from the crowd, making her cheeks burn red. She wanted to disappear right then and there, but instead she forced herself to take a deep breath and walk further into the room. She reminded herself why she was here, to challenge herself, not to impress anyone else. Still, the laughter stung. It wasn't just him either. As she tried to blend into the background, she noticed whispers and sideways glances from some of the other students. They weren't exactly welcoming, and their body language screamed, "What's she doing here?" Despite the unwelcoming vibe, she managed to find a spot along the edge of the mat, far enough from the action that she wouldn't get in anyone's way. That's when the instructor, a middle-aged man with kind eyes and a calm demeanor, walked over to her. He introduced himself and asked if it was her first time training. She nodded shyly, still feeling the weight of everyone's stares. Instead of joining in on the teasing, the instructor gave her an encouraging smile. "Everyone starts somewhere," he said gently. "Don't worry about what anyone else thinks, just focus on learning." Those words stuck with her. Even though the instructor seemed nice, the rest of the class made it clear they didn't expect much from her. When it came time to practice basic techniques, she stumbled through every move, earning more snickers from the guy in the black belt. Every time she fell flat on her back during a drill, he would shake his head dramatically and mutter something under his breath. She couldn't make out all of it, but phrases like "waste of time" and "this isn't for everyone" floated her way. Each barb felt like a punch to the gut, but she bit her tongue and kept going. She didn't want to give him or anyone else the satisfaction of seeing her quit. By the end of the class, her muscles ached, her GI was soaked with sweat, and her confidence was hanging by a thread. But despite everything, she showed up again, the next week, and the week after that. Because deep down she knew quitting wasn't an option. Not anymore. Something inside her had shifted. The ridicule hurt, sure, but it also lit a fire in her belly. She may have been a beginner, but she wasn't going to let anyone define her journey. Not even the arrogant black belt who thought he was better than everyone else. As the weeks went on, she learned to tune out the noise and focus on the basics. Slowly but surely, she started to understand the movements, even if she couldn't execute them perfectly. The instructor continued to encourage her, reminding her that jiu-jitsu wasn't about brute strength. It was about strategy, patience, and using your opponent's energy against them. Those lessons stuck with her, not just on the mat but in life too. Little did she know these early struggles were shaping her into someone stronger, not just physically, but mentally as well. And while she didn't realize it yet, the black belt's constant taunts were setting the stage for something bigger, something that would change not only her perspective, but also the way others saw her. All she needed was time, and the courage to keep showing up, no matter how hard things got. The weeks that followed were anything but easy. Every time she stepped onto the mat, it felt like her body was screaming in protest. Her muscles ached from head to toe, and there were days when even tying her belt felt like a monumental task. But despite the physical toll, the hardest part wasn't the pain. It was the constant reminders that she didn't belong. The black belt who had mocked her on her very first day continued to make his presence known, always finding new ways to belittle her efforts. During warm-ups, he would casually comment on how slow she was or how clumsy her movements looked. "You're wasting your time," he'd say with a smirk, loud enough for others to hear. Sometimes he'd exaggerate his own techniques while demonstrating drills, making sure everyone saw just how far ahead he was compared to her. Other students began to mirror his behavior, either joining in on the jokes or simply avoiding her altogether. It was as if being associated with her reflected poorly on them. She could feel their judgmental stares during every class, and it made her want to shrink into herself. But quitting wasn't an option. Not anymore. She reminded herself why she had started this journey in the first place. It wasn't about proving herself to anyone else. It was about proving something to herself. So she kept showing up week after week, no matter how much it hurt, physically or emotionally. Her instructor, however, noticed her struggles. He was a patient man, someone who believed in teaching not just techniques but also values like respect and perseverance. Unlike the others, he never dismissed her progress or underestimated her potential. After one particularly grueling session, where she repeatedly failed to execute a basic guard pass, he pulled her aside. "Don't let them get to you," he said firmly but kindly. "Jiu Jitsu isn't about strength, it's about intelligence. You don't need to be the strongest person in the room to win, you just need to be smarter." Those words stuck with her. For the first time since starting, she realized that maybe she didn't have to rely on brute force to succeed. Maybe there was another way, one that played to her strengths rather than highlighting her weaknesses. Inspired by her instructor's advice, she began approaching her training differently. Instead of trying to overpower her opponents during sparring sessions, she focused on observing their movements, looking for patterns and openings. She studied videos online late at night, watching tutorials and analyzing matches. Slowly, she started piecing together strategies that worked for her unique style. Still, progress was slow, and setbacks were frequent. There were days when nothing seemed to go right. Rolls left her gasping for air, submissions slipped through her fingers, and every attempt at defense ended in failure. The black belt took full advantage of these moments, using them as opportunities to mock her even more. Once, during a practice match, he pinned her down effortlessly and leaned close enough to whisper, "Maybe you should stick to something easier." His words cut deep, leaving her feeling humiliated and defeated. Yet instead of letting those comments crush her spirit, they fueled her determination. Each insult became a challenge, a reason to push harder, train longer, and dig deeper. She threw herself into her practice with renewed intensity, arriving early to stretch and staying late to drill techniques until her body begged for rest. Her hands developed calluses from gripping the GI, and bruises covered her arms and legs, but none of it mattered. What mattered was that she was improving, even if the changes were small and almost imperceptible to anyone else. One evening, after yet another tough class, she stayed behind to work on a specific move that had been giving her trouble. As she practiced alone on the mat, her instructor approached her again. This time, he didn't offer tips or corrections. Instead, he simply watched her for a moment before saying, "You've got heart. That's rare." It was a simple compliment, but it meant the world to her. For the first time, she felt seen, not as the awkward beginner everyone ridiculed, but as someone capable of growth and resilience. Encouraged by his words, she decided to take things a step further. Outside of class, She sought out additional resources to supplement her training. She joined online forums where experienced practitioners shared advice and insights. She read books about mindset and mental toughness, learning how to channel frustration into focus. And perhaps most importantly, she started visualizing success. Before falling asleep each night, she imagined herself executing perfect moves, escaping tricky positions, and earning respect. Not because she craved validation, but because she wanted to prove to herself that she could do it. As the months passed, subtle shifts began to occur. Her rolls became smoother, her transitions quicker, and her submissions sharper. While she was still far from mastering the art, she could feel the difference in her performance. More importantly, she noticed a change within herself. The fear that once paralyzed her was slowly being replaced by confidence. She no longer flinched at the sound of laughter or shrank under disapproving glances. Instead, she held her ground, determined to carve out her place in the dojo. Of course, the black belt hadn't changed his tune. If anything, his taunts grew louder as he sensed her growing resolve. But now, they rolled off her like water off a duck's back. She understood that his words weren't about her. They were about him. They revealed his insecurity, his need to put others down to feel superior. Realizing this gave her power over his insults. She stopped internalizing them and started using them as motivation to improve. By the time the next big milestone rolled around, a friendly exhibition match between advanced students and newcomers, she had transformed. Not just physically, but mentally and emotionally. She wasn't the same timid woman who had walked into the dojo months ago, unsure of herself and afraid of failure. Now she carried herself with quiet determination, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. Little did she know, the exhibition match would become the defining moment of her journey so far. It wasn't just a test of skill, it was a chance to silence the doubters and prove that true strength comes not from overpowering others, but from overcoming oneself. And though she couldn't predict exactly how things would unfold, one thing was certain: she was ready. The exhibition match was supposed to be a fun event, a chance for students at the dojo to showcase their skills and celebrate their progress. It wasn't mandatory, but everyone knew it was a big deal. The advanced students saw it as an opportunity to flex their abilities while the newcomers used it to test how far they'd come. For her, though, the announcement of the match brought a mix of emotions. On one hand, she felt excited about the idea of stepping up and proving herself. On the other hand, dread settled in her stomach like a heavy stone. She couldn't shake the thought of facing the black belt again. As word spread through the dojo, whispers began circulating. Everyone seemed curious about who would step forward to compete. Some students were eager to sign up, boasting about how they'd crush their opponents. Others hung back, unsure if they were ready. When the instructor asked for volunteers, there was a brief pause, a moment of hesitation where no one spoke. Then, against all odds, she raised her hand. The room went silent. Heads turned toward her, eyes wide with disbelief. Even the instructor looked surprised, though he quickly masked it with a proud smile. But the black belt? He didn't bother hiding his reaction. A smirk spread across his face as he leaned back against the wall, arms crossed over his chest. "Oh, this should be good," he said loudly, chuckling. His tone dripped with mockery, and a few people nearby laughed nervously along with him. Her heart pounded in her chest, but she forced herself to stay calm. She had known this moment might come, and she refused to let fear take control. Instead of backing down, she nodded firmly, letting her actions speak louder than words. The instructor paired her with none other than the black belt himself. If anyone needed proof that fate had a sense of humor, this was it. Over the next few days, anticipation buzzed through the dojo like electricity. People talked about the upcoming match constantly, speculating about what would happen. Most assumed it would end quickly, with her tapping out within seconds. After all, the black belt was known for his speed and strength. He dominated every sparring session, rarely losing even to more experienced opponents. To many, the outcome seemed obvious. She didn't stand a chance. but she didn't care what anyone else thought. In fact, the doubt only fueled her determination. Every training session became more intense, every drill more focused. She spent hours practicing techniques she hoped would give her an edge, replaying scenarios in her mind until she could visualize them perfectly. Her instructor noticed her relentless preparation and offered guidance whenever he could. "Focus on strategy," he reminded her. "Don't try to overpower him. Use his energy against him." On the day of the match, the atmosphere in the dojo was electric. Students gathered around the mats, chatting excitedly as they waited for the exhibition to begin. The air smelled of sweat and rubber, mingling with the faint scent of cleaning products used to sanitize the space after classes. She stood off to the side, stretching quietly and trying to steady her breathing. Her GI felt heavier than usual, and her palms were slick with nervous sweat. Despite her nerves, she kept reminding herself why she was here, not for revenge or glory, but to show herself that she could rise above the negativity. When it was finally time, the instructor called both competitors to the center of the mat. The black belt sauntered over with his usual cocky swagger, cracking his knuckles and grinning confidently. She walked slowly, each step deliberate, her gaze fixed straight ahead. As they bowed to each other, she caught a glimpse of his smug expression. "You sure you're ready for this?" he taunted under his breath. His words stung, but instead of responding, she simply nodded. Inside, her mind raced with strategies, focusing on the plan she'd rehearsed countless times. The referee signaled the start of the match, and everything else faded away. Time seemed to slow as she locked eyes with her opponent. Adrenaline surged through her veins, sharpening her senses and steadying her nerves. The black belt wasted no time. Within seconds, he lunged forward, aiming to take her down immediately. His attack was fast and aggressive, just as she'd expected. But instead of panicking, she stayed grounded, remembering her instructor's advice. She sidestepped smoothly, using his momentum to unbalance him. For a split second, surprise flickered across his face. He hadn't anticipated her quick reflexes. Before he could recover, she dropped low, driving her weight into his legs and executing a textbook ankle pick. The move was flawless, catching him completely off guard. With a thud, he hit the mat, hard, the impact echoing through the silent room. Gasps rippled through the crowd as people realized what had just happened. The black belt, the same man who had mocked her relentlessly, was now flat on his back. But she didn't stop there. Without missing a beat, she transitioned into a triangle choke, wrapping her legs around his neck with precision. Her movements were fluid, almost effortless, as if she'd practiced this exact sequence 1,000 times. And maybe she had. The black belt thrashed wildly, trying to escape, but it was too late. Within 14 seconds, he tapped out, pounding the mat in frustration. The room erupted into stunned silence. No one moved, no one spoke. All eyes were on her as she released the hold and stood up, breathing steadily. Her expression remained calm, almost serene, as if nothing extraordinary had happened. Meanwhile, the black belt lay sprawled on the mat, staring up at the ceiling in disbelief. For once, his arrogance was gone, replaced by something closer to respect, or perhaps shame. In that moment, something shifted, not just for her, but for everyone watching. The students who had once laughed at her struggles now looked at her with awe. The ones who had avoided her began nodding in admiration. Even the instructor, who had always believed in her potential, wore a proud grin as he watched her walk off the mat. Though the match itself lasted less than half a minute, its impact would resonate far beyond that night. It wasn't just a victory, it was a statement. A reminder that true strength isn't measured by size or skill alone, but by resilience, determination, and the courage to keep going when others count you out. And for her, it was the beginning of a new chapter, one where she no longer doubted her place in the world of Jiu Jitsu. The aftermath of the match was unlike anything she could have predicted. For a few seconds, the dojo remained eerily quiet, as if everyone was holding their breath. Then, slowly, whispers began to ripple through the crowd. Some students exchanged glances, their expressions a mix of shock and disbelief. Others openly stared at her, their eyes wide with admiration, or maybe even guilt. The black belt, still lying on the mat, sat up slowly, his face flushed with embarrassment. He didn't say a word, but the look in his eyes told its own story. He hadn't just lost a match. He'd been humbled. She stood there trying to process what had just happened. Her heart was racing, partly from the adrenaline of the fight, but mostly because of the weight of the moment. 14 seconds. That's all it had taken to silence someone who had spent months making her feel small. But instead of feeling triumphant or vindicated, she felt calm. She wasn't here for revenge or to prove anything to him. This win wasn't about him at all. It was about showing herself that she was stronger than she ever thought possible. As the referee raised her hand to signal the victory, a wave of applause broke out. At first it was hesitant, almost cautious, as though people weren't sure how to react. But soon the clapping grew louder, more enthusiastic. Some students even cheered, their voices echoing off the walls of the dojo. One by one they came, forward to congratulate her, some with pats on the back, others with genuine smiles. Even those who had once laughed at her struggles now offered words of encouragement. It was incredible, one student said, shaking his head in amazement. "I can't believe you pulled that off. You made it look easy," another added, chuckling nervously. "But I know it wasn't." Their praise warmed her heart, but what struck her most was the change in their tone. Gone were the snickers and sideways glances. Instead, she saw respect, not just for her skills, but for her perseverance. She realized then that this moment wasn't just about her. It was about challenging perceptions, breaking stereotypes, and proving that Jiu Jitsu wasn't reserved for the strong or the confident. It was for anyone willing to put in the work. The black belt eventually got to his feet, brushing himself off. For a moment, he avoided eye contact, clearly struggling with the reality of his defeat. But then, after a long pause, he approached her. His shoulders were slumped, his usual bravado nowhere to be seen. "Good job," he muttered, barely meeting her gaze. The words were simple, but they carried weight. She nodded, accepting his acknowledgement without gloating or rubbing it in. There was no need for that. What mattered was that he understood. He couldn't judge her based on appearances anymore. After the exhibition ended, the atmosphere in the dojo shifted noticeably. People started treating her differently, not just during class, but outside of it too. Conversations flowed more naturally, and invitations to train together became frequent. She found herself included in group discussions about technique and strategy, something she had never experienced before. The isolation she had felt when she first started was gone, replaced by a sense of belonging. It wasn't perfect, there were still moments of doubt, but it was progress. And progress, no matter how small, was worth celebrating. Her instructor noticed the change as well. During one session, he pulled her aside after class and gave her a warm smile. "You've earned their respect," he said. "Not just because of the match, but because of everything leading up to it. You showed them what real determination looks like." His words meant a lot to her, especially coming from someone she admired so deeply. She thanked him, feeling grateful for his guidance and support throughout her journey. As weeks turned into months, she continued to grow, not just as a practitioner, but as a person. The lessons she learned on the mat spilled over into other areas of her life. At work, she tackled challenges with renewed confidence, refusing to let setbacks discourage her. In social situations, she spoke up more, sharing her thoughts and opinions without fear of judgment. Jiu Jitsu had taught her that strength wasn't just physical, it was mental and emotional too. But perhaps the biggest change was in how she viewed herself. Before stepping into the dojo, she had always doubted her abilities, convinced she wasn't cut out for anything requiring skill or endurance. Now, she knew better. She understood that growth comes from struggle, that failure is part of the process, and that success isn't measured by external validation but by personal milestones. Every bruise, every drop of sweat, every moment of frustration had led her to this point, to a place where she could stand tall and proud. Of course, life in the dojo wasn't without its challenges. There were still tough days, times when she struggled to execute moves or felt overwhelmed by more advanced techniques. But she faced these obstacles with a different mindset now. Instead of seeing them as roadblocks, she viewed them as opportunities to learn and improve. She reminded herself that mastery takes time, and that every step forward, no matter how small, was worth celebrating. One evening, while practicing alone on the mat, she reflected on how far she'd come. She remembered the first day vividly, the trembling hands, the oversized gi, the laughter that had made her want to run away. Back then, she never imagined she'd be where she was today. She had started as an outsider, someone dismissed and underestimated. But through sheer determination and hard work, she had carved out her place in the world of Jiu Jitsu and earned the respect of those around her. Looking ahead, she knew there would be more challenges to overcome. Earning a blue belt was next on her list, though she understood it wouldn't come easily. But she wasn't afraid of hard work anymore. If anything, she welcomed it. Each obstacle was a chance to grow, to push herself further than she thought possible. And she knew she wouldn't be alone in this journey. Her instructor believed in her, her fellow students supported her, and most importantly, she believed in herself. That night, as she packed up her gear and headed home, she felt a deep sense of gratitude for the sport that had changed her life, for the people who had helped her along the way, and for the woman she had become. She wasn't the same person who had walked into the dojo months ago, unsure of herself and afraid of failure. Now she was someone who embraced challenges, celebrated victories, no matter how small, and refused to let anyone define her worth. Little did she know her journey was far from over. The exhibition match had been a turning point, but it was only the beginning. As she continued to train, she inspired others, especially newcomers who arrived at the dojo feeling just as uncertain as she once had. She became a mentor, offering advice and encouragement to those struggling to find their footing. Her story served as proof that jiu-jitsu wasn't about being the strongest or the fastest. It was about resilience, patience, and the courage to keep going, even when the odds seemed stacked against you. And so, her legacy began, not as a champion or a celebrity, but as someone who reminded others that true strength starts within. The days following the exhibition match brought a new rhythm to the dojo. For her, life had changed in subtle yet profound ways. The once hostile environment transformed into something almost unrecognizable, a space where people greeted her with genuine warmth and respect. It wasn't just surface-level politeness either. She could feel it in the way they trained together, the way they encouraged her during drills, and even in the small conversations before and after class. She had earned their trust, not through words, but through action. Her victory over the black belt hadn't just silenced him. It had shifted the entire dynamic of the group. But with recognition came responsibility. Newcomers began looking up to her, seeking advice or simply watching how she handled herself on the mat. At first, she felt uneasy about this newfound role. After all, she was still learning too. How could she possibly mentor others when she was still figuring things out herself? Yet, as time went on, she realized that being a mentor didn't mean having all the answers. It meant sharing what you knew, offering support, and leading by example. So whenever someone approached her with questions, whether it was about technique, mindset, or dealing with self-doubt, she did her best to help. One evening, a young woman joined the class for the first time. She looked nervous, constantly adjusting her gi and avoiding eye contact. When the instructor introduced her to the group, she mumbled something barely audible, clearly uncomfortable under everyone's gaze. Watching her reminded her so much of her own first day at the dojo. The trembling hands, the fear of judgment, the overwhelming sense of not belonging. That night, after class ended, she walked over to the newcomer and struck up a conversation. "Hey, I noticed it's your first time here," she said gently, sitting beside her on the bench. "How are you feeling?" The woman hesitated before answering. "Honestly, kind of overwhelmed. Everyone here seems so good, and I don't think I'll ever catch up." She smiled knowingly. "I know exactly how you feel. My first few weeks were rough. Trust me, nobody starts out perfect. Just focus on showing up. That's half the battle." They talked for a while longer, about everything from the basics of Jiu Jitsu to the importance of patience. By the end of the conversation, the newcomer seemed more relaxed, even cracking a small smile. Over the next few weeks, she made it a point to check in with her regularly, offering tips during practice and cheering her on whenever she succeeded. Slowly but surely, the woman began to gain confidence, just as she had done months earlier. Inspiring. Others became one of the most rewarding aspects of her journey. Seeing the spark of determination in someone else's eyes reminded her why she had fallen in love with jiu-jitsu in the first place. It wasn't just about personal growth. It was about creating a community where everyone felt welcome and supported. Of course, there were challenges along the way. Not every newcomer stuck around, and not every attempt at encouragement led to breakthroughs. But each interaction, whether successful or not, reinforced her belief in the power of perseverance and kindness. As her reputation grew, so did her responsibilities within the dojo. The instructor started assigning her tasks like helping beginners learn basic techniques or demonstrating moves during warm-ups. At first, she worried about making mistakes in front of others, especially given how critical some students could be, but she quickly learned that teaching was another form of learning. Explaining concepts forced her to break them down into simpler terms, deepening her understanding in the process. Plus, seeing the light bulb moments in other students' eyes gave her a sense of fulfillment she hadn't expected. Her relationship with the black belt also evolved in unexpected ways. After the exhibition match, he kept his distance for a while, likely processing his defeat. But eventually he began treating her differently, not with hostility, but with a grudging respect. During sparring sessions, he no longer held back or mocked her efforts. Instead, he pushed her harder, challenging her to improve in ways that only someone of his skill level could. Though their interactions remained professional rather than friendly, she appreciated the shift. It proved that even the toughest critics can change their perspective when faced with undeniable proof of someone's abilities. Outside of the dojo, her transformation continued to ripple through other areas of her life. Friends and family noticed the difference in her demeanor. Where she had once been hesitant to take risks or speak up, she now approached challenges head-on. Colleagues at work commented on her increased confidence during meetings, noting how she contributed ideas without hesitation. Even mundane tasks, like navigating crowded streets or handling difficult conversations, felt easier because she carried herself with a quiet assurance she hadn't possessed before. Jiu-Jitsu had taught her more than physical techniques. It had reshaped her mindset. She learned to embrace discomfort instead of avoiding it, to see failures as stepping stones rather than roadblocks, and to celebrate progress no matter how incremental. These lessons seeped into every corner of her existence, making her stronger, calmer, and more resilient. And while she knew she still had plenty to learn, she no longer doubted her ability to overcome obstacles. One day, during a particularly intense training session, her instructor called her aside. He handed her a neatly folded blue belt, its fabric smooth and slightly stiff from lack of use. "You've earned this," he said simply, pride shining in his eyes. She stared at it for a moment, her heart swelling with emotion. Earning a blue belt was a significant milestone in jiu-jitsu, a sign that she had moved beyond the beginner stage and was ready to tackle more advanced techniques. It was validation of all the hard work she had put in, all the sacrifices she had made, and all the doubts she had conquered. When she tied the belt around her waist for the first time, she felt a mix of pride and humility. Pride because she had achieved something meaningful, something she once thought impossible. Humility because she knew the journey was far from over. A blue belt wasn't the end goal. It was merely the next step in a lifelong pursuit of mastery. Still, it was a reminder of how far she had come and a promise of how much further she could go. That night, as she reflected on her journey, she thought about the countless hours she had spent drilling techniques, the bruises that had covered her body, and the moments of frustration that had tested her resolve. She remembered the laughter that had once filled the dojo, the mocking comments that had cut deeper than any chokehold. But most of all, she remembered the fire those experiences had ignited within her, the determination to prove wrong anyone who doubted her, including herself. Now, Standing tall in her blue belt, she understood that true strength wasn't about overpowering others. It was about rising above negativity, embracing vulnerability, and refusing to let fear hold you back. Jiu Jitsu had given her more than skills. It had given her a new way of living. And as long as she stayed committed to the art, she knew she would continue to grow, inspire, and thrive. Her story wasn't just hers anymore. It belonged to everyone who had watched her struggle and succeed, to every newcomer who saw her as proof that persistence pays off, and to every person who dared to dream bigger than their fears allowed. Through her journey, she had become a symbol of hope, a reminder that no matter where you start, you have the power to rewrite your narrative, and that was something worth fighting for. Months had passed since she earned her blue belt, and the dojo felt more like home than ever before. The once intimidating space was now a place of comfort, growth, and camaraderie. She no longer walked in with trembling hands or a racing heart. Instead, she entered with purpose, ready to learn and teach. Her journey wasn't just about personal victories anymore. It was about giving back, helping others find their footing in a world that often felt overwhelming. The transformation within the dojo was undeniable. Newcomers arrived almost weekly, each one carrying their own fears and insecurities. Some came because they wanted to get fit, others sought self-defense skills, and a few simply craved a sense of belonging. Whatever their reasons, they all shared one thing in common: uncertainty. Watching them reminded her of herself, the woman who had once stood frozen by the door, clutching an oversized GI and praying no one would notice her fear. Now, she was the one welcoming them, offering words of encouragement, and guiding them through their first rolls on the mat. One particular evening stands out vividly in her memory. A middle-aged man joined the class, visibly nervous as he adjusted his borrowed uniform. His hands shook slightly as he tied his belt, and his eyes darted around the room, taking in the flurry of activity. During warm-ups, he struggled to keep up, his movements awkward and uncoordinated. When it came time for partner drills, he hesitated, clearly unsure if he belonged there. She paired up with him, sensing his discomfort. "It's okay," she said softly, meeting his gaze. "We all start somewhere." For the next hour, she worked patiently with him, breaking down techniques into manageable steps and celebrating even the smallest successes. By the end of the session, he wore a tentative smile, his earlier anxiety replaced by quiet determination. As they parted ways, he thanked her sincerely, saying, "I didn't think I could do this, but you made me feel like maybe I can." Moments like these fueled her passion for teaching. It wasn't just about passing on knowledge, it was about empowering people. Every time someone tapped out during sparring, only to laugh it off and try again, she saw resilience. Every time a beginner executed a move correctly after weeks of struggle, she witnessed triumph. And every time someone stayed late to practice, refusing to give up despite frustration, she recognized grit. These moments weren't loud or flashy, but they were powerful. They reminded her that Jiu Jitsu wasn't just a martial art, it was a way of life. Her relationship with the black belt who had once mocked her also continued to evolve. Over time, he became less guarded, occasionally asking for feedback during training sessions or acknowledging her improvements with a nod of approval. While their interactions remained professional, there was a mutual respect between them now. He never apologized outright for his past behavior, but his actions spoke louder than words. Once, during a particularly challenging roll, he complimented her technique mid-match, a rare gesture that caught her off guard. Though small, it meant a lot. It showed that even those who doubted her initially could come to appreciate her hard work. As her reputation grew beyond the dojo, other students began referring to her as the mentor. It wasn't an official title, but it stuck nonetheless. People trusted her judgment, sought her advice, and relied on her support both on and off the mat. This role brought its own set of challenges, balancing her own training while helping others, managing expectations, and staying patient when progress seemed slow, but it also brought immense satisfaction. Knowing she played a part in someone else's success filled her with pride and reinforced her belief in the importance of community. Outside the dojo, her confidence spilled over into every aspect of her life. At work, she tackled projects with renewed energy, volunteering for tasks that once intimidated her. In social situations, she spoke up more, sharing her thoughts without second-guessing herself. Even mundane chores like grocery shopping or navigating crowded streets felt easier because she carried herself with assurance. Jiu Jitsu had taught her how to handle pressure, adapt to unexpected challenges, and stay calm under stress. These lessons weren't confined to the mats, they shaped her entire existence. Yet, despite all the positive changes, she remained grounded. Earning a blue belt hadn't erased her doubts or eliminated setbacks. There were still days when she struggled to execute advanced techniques or felt frustrated by her lack of progress, but she approached these moments differently now. Instead of letting failure discourage her, she used it as motivation to improve. She reminded herself that mastery was a lifelong journey, not a destination. Each obstacle was an opportunity to grow stronger, smarter, and more resilient. One day, during a group discussion about mindset, her instructor turned to her and asked, "What's the most important lesson you've learned since starting jiu-jitsu?" She paused, reflecting on everything she'd been through, the ridicule, the grueling training sessions, the victories big and small. Finally, she answered, "That strength isn't about overpowering others. It's about believing in yourself even when no one else does." Her words resonated deeply with everyone in the room. They nodded in agreement, some smiling, others lost in thought. It was a simple truth, yet profoundly impactful. Strength wasn't measured by physical prowess or technical skill alone. It was about mental fortitude, emotional resilience, and the courage to push forward despite fear or doubt. These qualities defined true strength, and they were accessible to anyone willing to put in the effort. Looking back on her journey, she realized how much she had changed, not just physically but mentally and emotionally. She had started as an outsider, dismissed and underestimated. But through perseverance, patience, and sheer determination, she had carved out her place in the world of jiu-jitsu. More importantly, she had inspired others to do the same. Her story served as proof that anyone could overcome adversity if they refused to give up. As the months rolled on, she continued to train, teach, and grow. She set new goals for herself, earning higher belts, mastering complex techniques, and competing in local tournaments. But these ambitions weren't driven by ego or the need for validation. They stemmed from a desire to challenge herself, to see how far she could go. She understood that success wasn't about external recognition. It was about personal fulfillment and continuous improvement. Her legacy extended beyond the dojo walls. Word of her journey spread throughout the local martial arts community, inspiring others to take up jiu-jitsu regardless of age, size, or background. She became a symbol of hope, a living testament to the idea that true strength comes from within. Whether she was mentoring newcomers, pushing herself to new heights, or simply showing up day after day, she embodied the spirit of resilience. And so her story continues, not as a tale of triumph over adversity, but as an ongoing journey of growth, connection, and empowerment. Through jiu-jitsu, she discovered not only her own potential, but also the power of community. She learned that strength isn't something you're born with, it's something you build, piece by piece, through hard work and determination. Most importantly, she realized that her journey wasn't just hers to keep. It belonged to everyone who dared to dream bigger than their fears allowed. In the end, her greatest victory wasn't silencing the black belt or earning her blue belt. It was proving to herself and to the world that true strength lies not in overpowering others but in overcoming oneself. And sometimes all it takes is 14 seconds to change everything.